To get us rolling. Hey, Matt Sitter here, CEO of AFN. At AFN, one of our fundamental beliefs is that change is where opportunity happens. The best way to find opportunity in change is a network that is diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. And what we do in our fireside chats is we bring experts together to help us think about things a little bit differently. Today, we've got two folks from Arena Labs with us, Brian Ferguson, who's founder and CEO, consummate entrepreneur, student of high performance, and former naval officer and dedicated public servant. Has done a lot over his career, which he can speak about much better than I can. And then Jackie Penn, their head of clinical performance. She's had an extensive career in performance management and program management. And so she thinks a lot about how you actually make the changes show up in what happens with the bottom line, whether you are a clinician, business person, etc. And Arena Labs, just really quickly, they're blazing the trail on high performance medicine. Their platform, Arena Strive, integrates data-driven strategies and expert guidance to enhance the training and resilience of clinicians in high-stress medical environments. So there's a lot that they're doing in terms of just making our healthcare better, which is of concern to all of us ultimately. Brian, Jackie, awesome to talk to you today.
Thanks,
Great to
Matt.
be here. Yeah.
Brian, I'll kick it over to you. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about your philosophy around Arena Labs and maybe what inspired you to focus on clinicians to begin with? And then Jackie, we'll have you talk for a minute about high performance medicine.
Thank you. Yeah, really high level for those tuning in, listening asynchronously or live. Our focus is in what we call high performance medicine. And at a very basic level, the provocative question we ask is, why don't we give doctors and nurses the same tools, coaching, and data as other high stress, high stakes fields? So people on the front lines of the military, creative artists who perform on stage under pressure night in and night out, or elite athletes who, whether Olympic or professional, have to think about performing under pressure. All of those disciplines, part of the training pipeline is to understand one's own body and one's own body in relation to stress, and ultimately how that plays out around recovery, sleep, and managing energy. In that training, there is generally a toolkit given, everything from visualization to breathing protocols to understanding how to sleep better. As it turns out, medicine does not offer those tools or that training in any part of medical school or nursing school. And there's a whole host of reasons why that is. But ultimately, our mission at Arena for the last 8 years has been to pioneer that set of tools and that thinking and training into frontline healthcare. The reason we focus there, Matt, at a very basic level, we are a mission-driven business. There's a lot of people focusing on human performance, but no one is doing it in healthcare. And we think it is not only central to society, but it lines up to what we call the service archetype. For our society to flourish, a small set of people raise their hands to serve society, to steward human health, to steward education, to steward human safety. Those people have a higher propensity to give of themselves to a mission beyond their body's capacity. And if they don't have these tools, that ends up in, we call it burnout, PTSD. There's a variety of terminology. So we think we can solve a hard problem central to society while doing something novel and with a little bit of swagger. One of our values is authentic swagger. So I'll turn it over to Jackie, who is, Jackie runs clinician performance for us. And what that really means is, how do we, when we are answering that provocative question, we are coaching doctors and nurses. It's actually really challenging because all other fields, people tend to own more of their time. In medicine, time is generally a constraint for every doctor nurse. There's emergencies and codes and operating room schedule shift. So Jackie has led the design of how we coach and challenge all of the orthodoxy around coaching. And her prior life has come out of, I'd say at this point, she's probably top 5 in the country of people who've thought about digital coaching and building platforms that allow someone to be coached asynchronously.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that, Brian. As Brian was saying, I do think a lot about the individual that doesn't necessarily have the time to sit an hour a day with the coach, right? And we see that a lot in healthcare. I think we see that, in a lot of different industries. And so how do we meet them where they are at and help them get into a better state, whether that is coming out of burnout or even performing at a higher level? And so digital coaching, which I think is an awesome thing to be able to offer to people, outside of just having synchronous in-person, one-on-one coaching, is we're able to think about how that person is performing within their 24 hours of the day. It's not just an hour of attention that you have. You can really be talking to them throughout the day in the moments that are going to matter the most for them. So we can leverage technology, whether it's through our wearables. At Arena specifically, we have the ability for people to journal of those sort of methods of understanding where somebody is, and then be able to provide really timely and valuable messages. One of the challenges that come with digital coaching, and clinicians experience a lot, they're constantly inundated with notifications, messages, people pulling on them. So sometimes the last thing that they need is just like another message. And so us crafting like that perfect, chat message, whatever it is essential. And we can do that by leveraging sort of our technological capabilities.
That's great. And, I think this is a microcosm of society writ large in terms of we're in a noisy environment overall. And it's just like the consequences are a little bit bigger for them getting pulled away from stuff. So it's great that you guys are thinking about this. And I think also when you're thinking about that asynchronous and digital coaching, it's great if you can have people sit one-on-one if they've got the time, but the reality is that's a massive cost as well. So it kind of hits both sides of the scale. And so breaking apart when we're thinking about who you guys are working with, I want to break apart the institutions versus the individuals. So, for you guys to be working with institutions that are out there, what's the goal of what they're trying to accomplish? They're saying like, hey, all right, cool, what Arena can do. What are some of the outcomes that they're hoping for against that? And I'll kick that to either one of you guys.
Yeah, we'll go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, no, from an institutional level, right? I think leaders are looking to be able to, one, equip individuals with the tools and strategies so that they can perform better. But then two, from a team leader perspective, you want to understand how your team is doing and what they need in order to be better supported. And so this plays into a little bit more of our predictive performance model, where we are able to take a lot of completely anonymized aggregated data and be like, hey, here are maybe some of the gaps or opportunities that we're seeing, and here are things that you could do with that from a higher team level, because that organizational structure is also really important in order for systems to operate at the highest tier.
Okay, so systems have to work well, and we need better care overall. Brian, what would you add on to that?
I think for anyone listening, whether running a company, a leader of any organization, like one of the things we get into, and I'll hit this quickly, but it's really at the core of our philosophy, which is that we are ultimately driving what we call predictive performance in healthcare, and where healthcare is different. But I think this is fair for anyone leading a company. Again, in sort of the spirit of provocation, if you think about how much time people spend on their P&L and looking at expenses and operational overhead, but often have very little data on the human system. That's a huge gap in the modern world. And in healthcare, while burnout depending on the index you look at, one of the leading causes of death in the United States is medical error. Medical error is a human being making an error because they are psychologically or physically degraded and they make a mistake. So what that starts to look like for us is if we're going to solve this hard problem, the first thing we've got to do is create a data set to help hospitals understand where to look and what's actually happening in the human system, which again, I think is very relevant to any company in today's world. But we use the term predictive performance, and at a high level, our thesis is that in the modern world, the organizations that will continue to thrive in the next decade in an age of AI and technological advancement are those organizations that double down on the human narrative. And they do so by equipping at the individual level. Matt, if you understand how to manage your sleep and recover and manage stress and what you need in your life, depending on the season of life you're at, and I can do the same and Jackie can do the same. If we do that across an organization where at the individual level, people are empowered with data and tools to manage and their lifestyle and flourish, in the aggregate, that's how we create a high-performing culture. And so it starts at the molecular individual level to create an aggregate story that allows us to get predictive, because we can tell when part of that human system is not performing, when they haven't slept enough, when they're reporting more stress. This is how obviously the best sports teams in the world have built world-class organizations. We are bringing that into healthcare. And so at the individual level of Jackie's team, if we can coach a surgeon to understand how to manage the stressors and recover smartly in a weekend in that craft, across 1,000 people in the health system, we start to build a very intelligent data set that allows that hospital to be predictive around things like medical error.
Yeah.
Well, I think the medical error stuff is so important. Just the financial pressures are huge at healthcare institutions, and you're saying like, hey, this is actually going to be a positive ROI for you overall. Sorry, Jackie, go ahead.
No, I just like the individual is so important in this. I think sometimes that gets, a little overlooked because we're trying to take care of everyone else or everything. But like it really comes back to, when you're on a plane and people say like, hey, you should put your air mask, I don't even know what it's called, on first before you put on your child's oxygen mask. Like that's the same thing. Like if you want to best support your team, you need to make sure that you are in a really good place and that you're trying to equip other people to be in a really good place. Because also as a leader, people are going to be watching you and what you do. And so if you want, folks to be performing at a high level, you want to make sure that they are setting themselves up for success, and they can learn a lot of that through what, seeing what you do with yourself.
Yeah. Okay. So when we've thought about the institutions, they're providing better care overall. We're going to reduce medical errors. There's going to be ROI benefit on that. When we're thinking about the individuals that are participating with Arena, what are they trying to get to? How, and I would say even at like a visceral level, how are they looking to feel instead of how they feel right now? What are you looking for them? Jackie, I think you're really well equipped to answer this.
It really depends on the person and where they're coming in at, right? And I think that's like goes back to the importance of having individual coaching. But in general, I think people are really looking to feel like they can show up in the ways that they want to show up every day and not feel like they're necessarily, exhausted or unable to meet the demands of what's going on within their work, whether it's dealing with clients or what's going on at home. And so that all starts kind of back to learning how to improve like your body's and your mind's capabilities to be able to be resilient and show up in those moments. And I know that doesn't maybe give like a perfectly, here's the numeric way of how they want to feel. And we do have intake forms that we look at to measure these things. But I think like ultimately people want to feel good in what they're able to deliver. And again, and how they're able to show up in the places that matter most to them. Brian, I know I can see you thinking there.
No, I would. I mean, I think but I think if just as an outsider, if I'm someone in the AFN network listening, and I don't work in healthcare, what Jackie's saying that's profound, and I think I challenge every leader to think about, is that up until really the last 5 to 10 years, leaders had to make a hard trade-off. We either buy a one-size-fits-all solution around stress management training. This is sort of in the healthcare world, the corporate wellness, the healthcare wellness, physician wellness world. One size fits all by definition fits no one, right? Something that fits everyone, like definitionally managing the landscape of human stress and energy and recovery is a deeply personal, individualized solution. Now, the other trait the corollary to that would be if I'm not going to buy one size fits all, I'm going to invest more money in a small number of people so I can get them personalized coaching or data sets. And there, by definition, I'm not actually serving the entire team. What we have continued to ruthlessly pursue is a platform that allows a highly personalized, data-driven experience. By data-driven, I'm wearing a sensor, so I'm getting a biometric feedback loop on my sleep and my stress. And Jackie's coaches see that. And while they're coaching you, they're individually giving you a set of solutions. So at scale, we are creating a cost-effective, highly data-driven solution that is individualized. We take a lot of pride. It's obviously taken a lot of engineering and hard thinking to do that. But ultimately what that allows, to answer your question specifically, Matt, is a sense of agency. Burnout is not feeling progress. And the service archetype in medicine, just like leaders, all of you, the teams you lead, people who are burned out feel like they're trying to keep their head above water and they're not making progress. A sense of agency for us is not, we're not trying to make you better at your job. That's our hope. What we focus on, how do we give you more time at home to recover and restore so that you feel a sense of agency and you show up to work a better version of yourself.
Great. Well, and both you guys alluded to the fact that, hey, you're watching some of the physiological aspects of these people. How are you building a baseline to understand how you would even customize this to begin with? What are you gathering on the person to be able to understand where they're at and how their plan can be accommodating to them?
There's a couple of different items that we gather. So one, you mentioned like we do use wearables. So we look at our recovery metrics. Right now, we primarily are looking at like HRV and as well as sleep consistency over time that will get built
Can you
out.
just say what HRV is real quick?
Yeah. So heart rate variability, which measures the beats between your heart, and it's a way for us to see into your autonomic nervous system, or whether you're kind of in a more of a parasympathetic system or a sympathetic system. So are you in that fight or flight, rest or digest type of thing? So basically, how well or how much, where is your body state and able to take on stress? So we look at those two, but then we also have them complete a number of baseline forms. So we have them complete sort of a form where we're looking at their professional fulfillment, their burnout propensity, their self-evaluation, as well as what are their goals? What are the things that coaches really need to take into consideration? So there's a lot from our intake that we really try to leverage to understand where someone is starting. And then, of course, our coaches are getting on they'll have introduction calls where they're taking that information that we've gathered and then digging deeper into what somebody has potentially listed out so that they really understand, why someone is there, and more intimately, like what are they hoping to achieve, so that we can make sure that we are helping them learn and practice strategies that are gonna work best for their circumstances.
So physiological side, certainly, and then thinking about, hey, how are they actually thinking about some of these things? Brian, anything you would add there?
No, Meg, just to pull it out a little bit again for the average leader listening here outside of healthcare, what I'm really proud that we've done is if Matt, if you decided you wanted to get executive coaching, and we got the Six Lean team on here who does, you guys know coaching better than just about anyone. The challenge in very time constrained environments is that if I want to get some up the curve to get them a coach, it's probably going to take 2 to 3 sessions of about an hour to understand the real landscape of their life, children, goals, values, struggles. Even in those 3 hours, I may have to invest as a leader. Let's say it's $500 an hour at a minimum $1,500. I'm still not going to have a biometric signature and understand their lifestyle, where they're struggling. So what we do, we've now automated all of this. If I have if a surgeon comes into our platform and one of Jackie's coaches are coaching them, yes, we're going to get the biometrics. So you mentioned heart rate variability. How well are you sleeping? But we have a qualitative set of assessments that give us a sense of how burned out you are. How much do you love your job? And then what are your values in life? What are your goals? We collect 50 data points. But what's beautiful is that, Matt, when you come in for your intake call with one of Jackie's coaches, that assessment has already gone through our analytics team. So your coach gets a 1-page output on Matt Sitter. So before you've even started, I understand your lifestyle signature around biometrics, what your goals are, where you're struggling, and then we track that for 8 weeks. But we've compressed now. In 15 minutes, you're going to get a high impact experience because you're time constrained that otherwise would have cost $1,500 to $2,000. And so what we've tried to challenge is the orthodoxy around price performance of coaching in a world where people are time constrained.
That's great. The analogy is very good for healthcare here when we're thinking about the things that get paid for oftentimes are the acute maladies, addressing something that is wrong right now. And you guys are thinking about stressors versus resilience overall. Like when we're looking at the physiological stuff, that's saying like, hey, here's what's happening with Matt right now. Here's his heart rate variability. But you're also saying, I'm looking back, thinking about what his mentality is and being able to use that to think about it on a longer term basis. When you're thinking about the differences between just addressing a stressor, like figuring out where you can put Band-Aids on someone versus actually addressing resilience where you're building muscles, how do you accommodate thinking about that within Arena and in the audience that you're working with, where it's just like, hey, they probably got little nicks and scratches that they got to deal with all the time, but really building muscles is something that'll help them long term.
It's a really good question, right? I was just talking with another teammate about this, about clinician or people, clients, anyone can come in with a very specific, like, oh, this is the one thing that I need to work on, and that's the thing that needs to happen. When as a coach, you know that underneath, maybe some of those fundamental areas are really what is going to get the most bang for their buck. So, but what is really important is that there is a relationship of trust between the client and coach. And so in the beginning, we do need to make sure that we are speaking to the immediate needs that somebody might have and helping create strategies to resolve what those needs are. And that helps build up that trust. And then once you do have that, when you're working with somebody, then you're able to talk about more like, hey, you're not getting sleep. Sleep is one of the biggest foundational aspects of that you can be able to form. Like, let's talk about that. I know this little thing feels like it's everything, and let's take care of that in a way and get that shelved. But I think we'll get more out of targeting your sleep, or whatever the big foundational piece is. I don't know if that answers your question, but there's like these little, to your point, there's like sort of these little cuts and scrapes, and we don't want to ignore those, but we need to make sure that we address them to some level before we're able to target the muscles underneath.
Well, and like I'm thinking about Maslow's hierarchy when you're talking about this. It's just like, hey, if you don't have food or shelter, talking about professional fulfillment just won't matter.
Right.
And so you're able to say like, hey, here's how we're addressing some of those food and shelter arguments. So therefore we can address something that's deeper around it. Brian, anything philosophically that you'd add in terms of thinking about that idea of addressing stressors versus building resilience?
I actually, this is probably more debatable. I'd say our team generally thinks about them as one and the same.
Okay. Yeah, great.
And that, most stressors are showing up because people don't have tools, or they don't have I always say a wearable sensor is not giving you answers. It's giving us a map, and it's showing us where to look and where you're deficient. The reason Jackie's team is that we are ultimately a coaching company is that if I put a sensor on you, Matt, that tells you that you're tired and stressed, if I don't give you tools, it just makes you more tired and stressed. So we are using the signal and what is the stressor? Is it lack of sleep? Is it, lack of agency? And then say, what are the tools to employ, and how do you employ them in a way that builds resilience? But that's ultimately, how we define flourishing.
When you guys think about building a culture of high performance, and that's what you're aiming at for a lot of these institutions, individuals obviously participate in the culture, but the culture in many ways is set by the institution itself. It's like the best statement I ever heard on culture was, that's just the way things are around here. So when you're thinking about that, how should institutions be enabling high performance for their teams that are consistently, dealing with high stress environments?
That's a good, yeah.
Yeah, well, Jackie thinks that, the thing that I always go to is that, number one, there's a few things that we really believe strongly. So the first here, and I think this applies, I would offer this up to every leader grappling with how do I invest? Because as you suggested, Matt, the one thing that is a truism in any organization in today's world, I don't care where you work, is that people feel more stressed today than they did 5 years ago, and certainly more than 10 years ago. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that ultimately get into, technology and connectivity that we all know innately. The question is, okay, what do I do about that? One of the things that I learned in a profound way that we stumbled into that is really the bedrock of how we talk and communicate about Arena is that human beings do not invest in nor gravitate to broken human narratives. Matt, if you say to me, Brian, you're broken or you will be broken, it's human nature for me to want to distance myself from that. And, just like PTSD in the military, everyone knows that's a very real outcome of the last 2 decades of warfare. But no one wanted another mandatory PTSD briefing when I was in the military. And I was getting out just as that was kind of like becoming a big issue. In healthcare, no one wants another mandatory burnout prevention training. So we talk through the aspirational narrative of human performance, which our clinicians find very refreshing. Not everyone's pursuing human performance and flourishing to try to be the best surgeon in the world. Some of them just want to be better parents at home. But it feels refreshing and aspirational rather than, hey, you're broken, we're going to help you be less broken. So that's the framework, is the language is really important. The second piece is, I always say, we are not a panacea. We're not going to solve all the problems in healthcare. However, when you start to see at this point, we really look for cohorts no smaller than 200 doctors and nurses. And the reason for that is when you start getting larger percentage of the population putting on sensors and working with coaches, you begin to normalize a conversation around performance. When people show up to work and they're talking about how'd you sleep last night? Did you think about active recovery this weekend? It sounds trivial, but it's scale in an organization. That's how you actually change culture, is people willingly are having conversations that are not dictated nor obligatory. So we really believe that our focus is the aspirational narrative of human performance and human flourishing to drive a cultural evolution.
It's great. Jackie,
I don't know if I have anything I can add on that.
It was pretty good.
Yeah, I agree more. It's funny, when I first joined Arena, we operate in cohorts where we work with people, our team, or at institutions, so have 200 people come at a time or more. And I always was like, oh, why are we, doing that? And then the first time I saw it happen and the changes that happen culturally within teams or within, a department, because of everyone's on this platform at the same time and talking about it, that was really, really cool. And it just showed the reinforcement of the power of a company culture, talking with your colleagues, all of that. It's a pretty big mover. So
it's great. It's awesome to see it in action. I want to go back to something you mentioned early on, Jackie, in terms of, the digital and asynchronous stuff in a noisy environment. We know that the clinicians are being put, if you're in the middle of a heart surgery, you just can't actually address something maybe in the moment. You're worried totally about the patient, and the noise is everywhere for all of us. How are you guys actually thinking about that in a way that you can have interventions or interactions that don't seem as interruptive for folks and that they're willing to spend the time around it?
Yeah, I think it's a couple pieces. The one so within the platform, clients or clinicians can go in and there's actually bite-sized lessons or videos that people are able to watch that are very short and sort of direct and to the point. And so it's really important that whether it is our messaging from our coaches or whether, it's content that they are watching, that we are very sensitive to the time that these things can take. But I think another piece to this actually kind of goes back to a little bit of trust. The power of the asynchronous coaching is that as a clinician, if you are experiencing something, and now it might not be in the middle of surgery, but maybe you come out of surgery and you're like, I had this happen. I don't want to wait to my session, which is next week or whatever it is. You have the ability to go in and message your coach and be like, this is what's going on, or I don't know how to think about it or approach it, or should I have done this differently? And the coach is able to follow up. So it can feel a lot more time relevant to what is actually happening. And so I think that's just a really big superpower, that you don't have to hold on to these things to your next coaching sessions. It can just be much more quickly delivered and applied.
And maybe you said shorter bite size. I'm interested, just from the perspective of thinking about our attention spans collectively now. What do you consider to be short or bite-sized?
Yeah, and our video content is about 2 to 3 minutes long per video. So it really is, we try to highlight the most important things first. And now you have the ability to dig in deeper if you really want to. But again, we do need to think about what is someone's what do their time constraints look like?
Well, and respecting someone's time, I think, is
huge. Yeah,
is pretty important.
Yeah.
Brian, anything you'd add there?
No, it's a fine line though, because we want to respect time, but the problem with doctors and nurses is there's too much. There's the I would argue there's a perverse landscape of what it means to respect time. And what I mean by that is these are people who are obsessed with the patient, which is very important. If you walk into any hospital, there's an obsession around patient quality, patient safety, everything's about the patient. That usually comes at the expense of the clinician. And so we have to be careful, to your point, Matt. We can't ask people to come in and give 5 hours a week. So we're literally asking for 5 hours a day, but that continues to open up we have an obligation to build a platform that's so compelling and a coaching experience so valuable that people want more of it. But if we do our jobs well, we start to actually kind of turn on the light bulb that if I want to be world class in my job and think clearly and show up with the right level of energy to make decisions and have emotional intelligence for my team, that means I need to be making a little more of an investment day to day in myself, and not in a corny, contrived way, but like, hey, if you want to be world class, you have to make time. So we really try to challenge again the orthodoxies of what I think is a broken system with incentives that are misaligned.
Yeah,
Great.
just to be clear that like our coaches are, people want to be spending more time talking. They're there and available to do that. But we're able to do that by providing really valuable messaging or really valuable content because that encourages like, oh, I'm seeing what I'm getting out of this and I want to get more out of it. We always try to pulse, where the individual is and what they're looking to get.
Great. Before we open it up to questions for everyone else who's here, and if you want to ask a question, just pop up on video, ask it through text. But the last thing I'm going to ask both of you guys is, in an environment where there is a lot coming at us, and I think particularly the news cycle, there's a lot that's coming at us around that as well. What are you looking forward to in the rest of 2025? What good things do you think are coming?
Wow.
What do you think, Brian?
I'll tell you for us, we have, so I'll answer professionally and then personally. On the professional front, as we, like just as our team matures, what is exciting is bringing in talent that just has a lot of experience. And with that, like just the arc of building anything, you start out really kind of unclear, people are passionate, and then eventually you become, the mission gets clearer and clearer, and then you start to attract extreme talent. Jackie's a great example where she came out of digital coaching, and is just really precise in how she's building our platform. But for us, we have a team now that is starting to attract higher levels of not just opportunity in healthcare, but building solutions that are like, we're starting to really see people change the way they think. That's just like rewarding. At the end of the day, no other way about it. The reason you get into a mission-driven company is to feel like you're actually impacting. On the personal front, as the team grows, in the spirit of our work, Jackie knows this. I talk a lot about it. I'm definitely an example of, founder burnout. And so having more time and stillness for me, as the team grows and takes more, sort of capacity off of my plate, that's just, I love being still right now in this season, which sounds boring, but stillness for me is a big one.
Right. Jackie, what do you got?
Yeah, professionally, I think, I'm a coach at heart. Like I love seeing individuals improve. And so as we are growing as a team and we're continuing to develop our systems and infrastructure to be able to see us impact more and more people, for me, like that just feels so, I don't know. There's nothing like it for me. And especially in an industry where, those working in service often don't always get the attention or support that they need. And so to be able to directly support those that are servicing others, that's just, yeah, I don't know. I look forward to it every day. And then on a personal front, I'm trying to think of like some great stillness answer. I don't know if I have that. But I do have some, upcoming trips that I've been really looking forward to as we have some close friends that are getting married and, I think that's kind of always exciting too.
Jackie's an equestrian horseback rider.
I was thinking about saying something like that, but I didn't know if I was ready to tell everyone I was a horse girl, but thank you, Brian.
All right, that all counts. We got to have things we're looking forward to.
Yeah.
All right, so going to questions again. If you got a question, just pop up on video. I know Brenda put one in chat here. I'll read it out for you guys. Is there feedback provided to hospital administration that may speak to staffing that would put less pressure on doctors and nurses that would reduce their stress? How does long shifts as a standard work against worker wellness in general?
Yeah, it's a really astute question, Brenda. I don't know if you have healthcare experience, but on the first, our work, back to this idea of predictive performance, the first thing we had to do was create the content and the learning journey to then coach. And Jackie brought in the coaching team. Now we're creating a data set. The work of our predictive performance team is to take the data, the biometric data from sensors that doctors and nurses are wearing, the qualitative data on, we use something called the Stanford Professional Fulfillment Index, how burned out are people, put all of that data into a story. What is really cool, we just, last year, Advocate Health System, which is in Charlotte, we have a series of papers being published around the work we did there, but we had 400 clinicians in the platform, and they were distributed across, I forget how many zip codes, like 20 zip codes in the US. So it was a really large population of people, again, geographic distribution. The story now, as we get that data set, we can start to look at that data through the prism of geographies or service lines. So as an example, in that health system, the women's health service line stretches from Chicago all the way down to Atlanta and a whole bunch of different hospitals. And that data set tells us a story that, one particular part of that, in this case, the women's service line, was reporting and seeing more stress. And that allows us to go into that data and say, what is the reason for that? Is that a staffing issue? In some cases, a leadership issue. So that is really exciting, to use data to illuminate the untold human narrative of a health system. That gets into the second part of the question, Brenda, which is, okay, now how do we take that operationally into the institution? In a separate hospital, about a year and a half ago, Hospital for Special Surgery, one of the really interesting insights we got is that in that institution, there are 3 different types of shifts: 8 hours, 10 hours, and 12 hours. Unequivocally, those who are working 10 hours had higher levels of burnout, right? So what the reason for that is, that's where, there's still more work, but that initial swath provides a really interesting operational insight for the hospital. We call it operationalizing physiology, because once we start to collect biometric data on sleep and physiology, it starts to tell a story that's really powerful.
That's pretty cool. Other questions from folks? Come on up on camera or throw them into the chat.
I'm curious, Matt, for you, how do you guys think about, you've done a lot of these, obviously that you are alluding to the fact that most leaders and their teams are struggling with, whether we call it the landscape of stress, more information. What has been sort of the more compelling solutions or approaches you've seen?
Well, so 2 things that I'll think about out there is, generally speaking, I think that the tyranny of the metrics, the return that you've got to get, is problematic in terms of thinking about hey, how are we actually going to be able to deliver on next quarter's results, rather than thinking about how you are accommodating what's going on with your team. And so, in particularly, there's certain leaders out there, the new leaders, they're not actually adept at thinking about how am I managing what's going on with the individuals that are working for me. They haven't really had pause to be able to build that EQ muscle as much for them. And so I think one of the most important things that we do in terms of coaching is saying all right, what are some of the reasons that this might have happened? Even if it's not the reason that someone actually did something, it's thinking outside of themselves in some way. What is the reason or underlying circumstances that may have led to a certain behavior that you observed? So really building out that empathy piece. And then it opens up a whole different world to you, where it's just oh, it turns out not everyone thinks the same way I do. And that's a surprise to all of us at some point. It's just some of us asked that question a little bit earlier than others. And so I think hitting on that empathy piece is really important. Contrasting with something that you said earlier, Brian, on the broken narrative, I would say the broken narrative appeals very strongly to institutions. They want to know where the risk is. And so being able to say like, hey, here's a problem that we see. And they're like, okay, we can solve the problem because they're viewing it as like, hey, how do we actually get greater ROI on that? But at an individual level, I think you are spot on that like the broken piece is something that they're not going to respond to as strongly.
Cool.
Kelly, thanks for letting me respond to Brian's question.
Yeah, no, it's all interesting conversation. I love hearing you guys talk about this, and I am just like a super nerd. So, thanks for being here today. One question I have is my understanding, like early stages of burnout, someone's like belief system and mindset starts to get intertwined with their work, like their identity and their work are kind of becoming one. And so I'm wondering when you see the physiological responses with sleep, with HRV, and you understand that maybe it's this like mindset and values alignment, how does the asynchronous coaching kind of challenge some of that thinking?
Yeah, so I will say Jack can get into kind of the forensics of biometrics, but I think Kelly, one of the things, and you know this well from your own service and your husband's, but again, back to the service archetype and the mission-driven approach we have, I think by nature, most people who are service archetypes, whether it's on the front lines of healthcare, the military, first responders, teachers, their work is their identity in a way because they believe so deeply in them. It's the beauty of what makes someone extraordinary in service. It is also the Achilles heel of what accelerates burnout in those fields. So our approach is to say, like, number one, how are we reframing the way you think about what you do? What we generally, and where you see like the burnout literature and statistics in healthcare tend to be that people no longer feel like they're doing the thing they signed up for. A lot of times that is administrative overhead and burden. So you hear a lot in like for doctors, charting and electronic medical records is a huge issue. What we would argue is that a lot of times, our work is not prolific or profound. It's actually incredibly basic. Basic doesn't mean easy. What I mean by that is, as an example, burnout. So there's unequivocally a value alignment side of this of, okay, are you doing the thing? If you're a trauma surgeon, are you doing enough? Are you doing trauma? Do you feel like you're saving lives? But in that, the nature and the intensity of that work is usually blinded in some way by missing the basics. So back to the trauma example, these are people who work insane, unpredictable hours. What we now know about health and well-being and human flourishing is there is number one, a bidirectional relationship between psychology and physiology. So as these people are getting exhausted because they're so demanded, they're accelerating that exhaustion by working some days, some nights, they get an unpredictable schedule and their circadian rhythm gets out of whack. And so the basic side, again, as I said earlier, we don't ever present to clinicians that we're solving all of your problems. But our belief is if we teach you about sleep-wake timing and that getting your sleep-wake timing in good order, even after you've been on call and worked a long weekend, can radically shift your psychology and start to lower that burden of burnout, that's incredibly profound. And that allows people to then get a little bit decoupled from that cloud of service where they feel like they're now in this treadmill and can no longer get perspective. So I don't know that is maybe is kind of deeply academic and like, how do we think about decoupling identity at work from identity in life? But my personal vantage point is like the people who are the most passionate about service, that's the beauty, but it's also the challenge is that those things are symbiotic.
Yeah, I mean, 100% agree with what Brian is saying. When you are, day in and day out breathing the work that you are doing and you firmly believe in it, and you are neglecting perhaps other areas of your life because of this, whether, it's taking care of yourself or getting the sleep you need, the food that you need. And this all sounds basic and it's like, what? That's, but that is like really foundational to how the body operates and how the body communicates with the mind, right? Like Brian said, is bi-directional. And so when we can get the foundational systems in working order, that is going to help with maybe some of the more, mental strains that you're dealing with.
Yeah, I kind of was thinking of it as like a chicken or an egg, which one comes first, the physiological aspect of it or the mindset shift.
Yeah. And it can be a little bit of both at times, right? Like you might need to target a little bit more of what is going on mentally so that you do have the capacity to focus on some of more of the structural physiological systems. Um, but I think people often can ignore it entirely, which is problematic as well.
And one part, Kelly, is also what I find is fun about healthcare, very similar to the military in that it's one of the most diverse institutions in America, and that, socioeconomic, from every way. One of the challenges that and this is a big challenge at Jackie's coaching team, and with the reason we built a coaching academy, is that the answer to that question is in some ways is different for a physician versus a nurse. Generally speaking, nurses tend to have more of an identity at home and an identity at work, where physicians, it's unified. Interestingly, you guys know Dr. Preston Klein, Mission Critical Teams Institute. He's got a lot of the content he did in our platform is around like, what's your third thing? What is, outside of work and home, what are you doing? And a lot of these folks can't answer that question. We talk about active recovery, like we get into a lot. How do you recharge on the weekends? What is your third thing? That is a really, again, basic question that tends to be pretty profound for a lot of physicians because if you're a cardiac surgeon, you spend about 17 years of your life just like getting to be a cardiac surgeon. So you don't have a life outside of studying and acquiring this technical skill. So you wake up and you're 40 and you're like, I don't really have anything I do outside of work. So that ends up being a starting point.
Thank you.
Bridget, go ahead.
I'm with Kelly. I'm nerding out and loving every bit of this conversation. I was just having a conversation with a leader in finance in the past couple of weeks, and she and I were talking about these topics broadly. And she defaulted, and I'm kind of smiling, thinking about how you both said what we do is basic, or just because it's simple, it doesn't mean it's easy. She's like, look, at this point, a lot of this information is out there, and none of us do it. Like, we know what we should be doing. And yet we continuously stay in this pattern over here that we also know isn't working, but want to pretend is working at some level for us. So I was curious, Jackie in the hands-on coaching piece and Brian from your lens, like, what do you think helps unlock the actual practices of shifting behavior?
Oh, behavior is like so tricky, right? Because you're getting into like behavioral loop pathways in the brain, and it's hard to change those. So I think, and again, this all comes down to the person and the thing that they are working on, and really like what their starting point is. So I always feel like with these types of answers, I always feel like the answer is too general because it can be so unique. I think one of the biggest things is to understand somebody's why. Like, why do they want to shift this thing, right? That is really important because if it's not incredibly meaningful, it can be difficult to stick to. But then finding the way that you can create the like smallest momentum in the right direction. So if it's like, okay, hey, I like have a hard time falling asleep because I'm doom scrolling on Instagram. Or I'm just trying to think of like the first step to that is, okay, what are they doing prior to getting into bed with their phone? That's like creating that cue, because there's like cue going on where like, okay, now I go and I start scrolling. And so how do you change that to something else or make them aware that they are creating this cue or replace it with something different? That's like, again, really high level. It doesn't maybe work for every situation. But it's just like those little things over time and trying to connect it back to, their whys or really explaining like what's going on that I think I found to be more successful.
Yeah, I think Bridget, so actually in the front end, Jackie was mentioning Jackie just brought in a coach manager who's now overseeing all of our coaches are 1099, so they're not full time, and depending on the size of the cohort, we bring larger amounts in, but all of them go through our coaching academy to understand, okay, how do I interface with clinician? Diane's interesting because she brings, her background is in the psych world, and she thinks a lot about behavior change and what are the levers here. Again, a few things. One, what I think we generally see is there's one, maybe two things that people are changing. And with clinicians, and I think this is probably true of finance, if we're being effective, it's usually one of our coaches, Matt Cumby, uses this term subtractive. Rather than additive, this is subtractive. It's actually making your life smoother. And that's the art versus the science of coaching. If I zoom out a bit, I think like my experience of finance leaders is they tend to be very hungry pursuing a path of high performance. And so they actually tend to be more intellectually curious around their own performance in a way that healthcare is not. And the irony of healthcare is most of us have white lab coat syndrome. We think doctors and nurses are wizards who know everything there is to know about the human body. Most of these people have never learned the basics of sleep science, of the nervous system. And so weirdly, there tends to be a larger knowledge gap in healthcare than you would expect. So that ends up for us being an advantage. Now, the thing that I think we've done that is very unorthodox, and again, people could debate whether it's the right path. One of the things we say is no one in healthcare wants another SaaS platform. The software is a service, like you're going to do this forever and we're going to change your behavior. Like that just doesn't work. So we flipped that entire script and said, just give us 8 weeks, work with a coach, and we're going to use the Hawthorne effect to our advantage, which if someone's watching you, you change your behavior. And the Hawthorne effect is, number one, a human being, one of Jackie's coaches that actually is seeing your data. And the other side of that is you're wearing a sensor that you see. You cannot look away from your own data on how little you're sleeping. You can tell me you sleep 8 hours, and then you're going to look at a sensor that says you actually slept 5 because you rolled around in bed for 3 hours worrying about what happened with your patient earlier in the day. That actually is powerful for us. And what we see is if 8 weeks people change their behavior, even if it's contrived because they know someone's paying attention, that opens up a chasm where they start to think a little differently about things like sunlight, artificial light in the hospital, how they spend their weekend. And that's where we actually see a data set change from week 0 to week 8 with a tail of at least, go into week 12. And I think, we are very proud that's better than anything in the market right now. It's not indefinite, it doesn't solve all the problems, but we've said, look, we're not going to come in and say that we're going to fix everyone's behavior indefinitely because that's just false. And so we take a very different approach.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like life changes and stages too, right? What works for you in one period of life might change into the sort of another period of life, and so you're always are going to be learning new habits or things that you need to focus on based off what season of life that you're in. To Brian's point of sort of like accountability from a coach is helpful, especially if you don't have to necessarily self-report it. We do have I've seen it like, our coaches will be like, hey, we talked about doing this thing, or, you said that you were going to go to bed at X time. I see it was this time. What happened? It's not necessarily like, accusational depending on the situation, but like somebody that there is like, oh, we talked about this, it didn't happen. Then that like goes to this conversation of like, okay, oh, you were dwelling on your patient. Let's talk about, a way to either like self-decrease or use breath work or whatever it is to, avoid those situations coming down the line.
Can I ask one more question?
Okay. Well, we got to let Betsy have a shot.
Oh,
You already
okay.
got yours.
No, mine is not nerdy, or it's actually kind of more of a fun question. So go ahead, Kelly.
Are you sure, Betsy? Okay. My one question is like when you think about aggregating all this data and then the problem you're trying to solve of human error in healthcare, like do you have any concerns over like retribution of people joining this cohort? They're now like their physiological symptoms are being tracked. They're now on the path for burnout. How do you manage that conversation between the individual and the organization?
This is not a good question, Anna Kelly, so I could soapbox.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
You're right. It's the most important question. I'll hit it quickly. So number one, right now, data is not discoverable. Biometric data is not discoverable in a hospital. That's so for in terms of medical malpractice. Number two, we blind and de-identify all of our data. So if this team's on there, Kelly and Matt's data can't be seen by the hospital, only our coaches see it. But number three, if you fly Kelly to Nashville and you take a plane, the FAA regulates crew rest time for that pilot and flight attendant. If you go by overland transportation, train, private vehicle, Department of Transportation regulates vehicle operating time. Hospital healthcare is the last high stakes industry not to recognize the psychophysiological limits of a human under pressure. So not measuring it is insane. Like to just say, well, we're not going to do it because there's some potential retribution. I would say, mark my words, 5 to 10 years from now, there will be a lawsuit. Now, what we know about sleep science, there'll be a lawsuit where a doctor or nurse sues a hospital for knowingly putting them in an unsafe position. Asking someone to stay up for 2 days and then perform surgery, like it's insanity. So we really think that the world's moving this way. We want to be in the front end and give hospitals a chance to say, how are we going to integrate this before it gets regulated?
Thank you.
Betsy, we're running low on time. So Betsy, you get the last word.
Okay. It's not nerdy, and it's not to oversimplify what you do at all. But Brian, when I was posting social media content about you, your personal connection to the healthcare through your mom, it made me think of Noah Wiley and his personal connection to healthcare, and hence the creation of the series, The Pit. So he's being lauded, right, for helping to bring awareness to really broad strokes to what you're now trying to solve. Have you seen the show, and do you think it is representing what's really going on?
I have not seen it. I appreciate bringing that up, Betsy. It comes up a lot, interestingly, as like, just a point of signal. A lot of clinicians bring it up and say like, it's actually a good representation of my life or our life in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people feel proud that their world is being highlighted. I mean, that's our, I was saying on the front end, one of our values is authentic swagger, meaning like remind healthcare frontline clinicians what they do is badass and important for society. And you should be compared to people in the military, the creative arts, or sport. So I think shows like that culturally, in the wake of the pandemic are sort of bringing back the importance of those roles in a flourishing society. So, but I haven't seen it yet.
Highly recommend.
All right.
It's really good.
Yeah, it is really good.
All right, we're at time. Brian and Jackie, this was awesome. Thank you so much for spending time. I know that we spent a lot of time talking about healthcare, but there's a lot around this that we can take away as lessons for other industries. So really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for the time. It was great.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.